Welcome to the Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us. Today we are diving into something that, well, it feels like it leaped straight off a sci-fi movie screen. Brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, and neural implants. We're talking about connecting human minds directly to machines.
It's a wild concept, absolutely. But, it's one that's rapidly becoming reality. We've spent time with the sources you share, all those articles, research papers, really digging into this fast-moving field, looking closely at the technology, the companies involved, and yeah, some of the big players like Neuralink.
And our mission is pretty simple. Unpack all of that. We want to pull out the most important insights, understand where this implantable neurotechnology stands right now, what its incredible potential is, the very real challenges it faces, and frankly, the pretty profound implications it raises for all of us.
Yeah, it's certainly moving beyond just theory into, well, the realm of tangible possibility. It offers immense hope, especially for people with severe disabilities. But as you might guess, it opens up a bit of a Pandora's box of questions, too.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. Let's start at the very beginning. What fundamentally is a brain-computer interface, and how did we even get here?
Okay. So, at its heart, a BCI, sometimes called a brain-machine interface, is basically a system. Its job is to take signals from your brain, figure out what they mean, analyze them, and then translate that into commands that an external device, like a computer or maybe a robotic arm, can actually use.
Right. And a major foundational piece of research in this space, particularly here in the U.S., has been the BrainGate program, hasn't it?
Definitely. BrainGate has been researching this for a long, long time, and the sources you sent over, they really highlight the story of a participant named Dennis DeGray. His experience really shows you what was possible, even relatively early on.
DeGray, yeah. He's a man paralyzed from the collarbones down after an accident. And back in 2016, he had something called Utah arrays surgically implanted in his brain's motor cortex. It's the area that plans and controls movement. These arrays are tiny silicon squares with electrodes.
And the sources tell this incredible story. I mean, with those implants, he was able to send what's described as the first text message ever sent from the neurons of one mind to the mobile device of another.
Just think about that for a second. He wasn't moving anything physically at all. He was imagining the movement, the implant picked up those neural patterns, and the system decoded that into commands. He could move a cursor on a screen just to select letters. He apparently made purchases on Amazon using only his thoughts, and he even controlled a robotic arm to stack blocks. It's amazing.
That story is such a powerful proof of concept, isn't it? It shows that direct brain control isn't just theoretical, it can actually work.
Right. But, and this is a big but, the sources also make it really clear that while that early technology, the Utah arrays, show the possibility, it came with some significant real-world limitations.
Oh, huge limitations. The Utah array is, about the size of a dime? And each one typically has about 100 electrodes. Researchers might implant a few of these, so you're recording for maybe a couple of hundred neurons, tops, out of, billions in the brain.
And the practicalities were just really challenging. First off, putting them in requires open brain surgery. That's a big deal for anyone.
Huge. And it wasn't wireless back then. There was literally a socket, a physical port sticking out of the skull, connected by wires to external computers running all these machine learning algorithms to translate the brain signals.
Which sounds about as far from seamless integration as you can possibly get for daily life, right?
Exactly. Plus, with only a relatively small number of neurons being recorded, the range of tasks you could perform and how precisely you could do them, well, it was pretty limited.
And the sources mention durability is a big issue, too. Over time, scar tissue builds up around the electrodes, doesn't it? Which degrades the quality of the signal they can pick up.
Yeah, that's a constant battle. And this is crucial. For people like Dennis DeGray, these abilities weren't constant. His brain control only worked when the device was physically connected to the research equipment, during specific sessions. When disconnected, those telepathic powers, as one source amusingly put it, were gone. Leigh Hochberg, who's a BrainGate co-director, is quoted directly saying that a reliable, around-the-clock system for intuitive brain control simply doesn't exist yet.
Okay. So you have this foundational research showing it can be done, but with these major practical and technical hurdles. And then the sources really highlight, you see this incredible injection of energy from Silicon Valley.
Yes. That's where things really started to accelerate. You begin seeing these high-profile entrepreneurs, big tech companies, and a whole wave of startups jumping in. And they're not just focused purely on the medical necessity anymore. They're pushing towards creating actual commercial-grade hardware, often with the goal of wireless implantable systems.
And the name that comes up most frequently in the sources, I mean, the one that's captured the most public attention by far, is Neuralink.
Yes, Elon Musk's company. Neuralink is developing its own implantable wireless system. It's also about coin size, sort of similar to the Utah array base in that sense, but their ambition is to pack in vastly more electrodes. They're aiming for over 1,000 per device compared to the Utah array's 100. And they believe you could potentially place up to 10 of these devices in someone's head.
Wow, that's a massive leap in potential data they could collect from the brain, isn't it?
It really is. And their implantation method is quite different too. They use these incredibly thin threads made of a flexible polymer material, almost like fine wires with electrodes along them. These threads are designed to be sewn in, as they call it, by a specialized robot. The hope is that by carefully avoiding tiny blood vessels, this process will reduce scarring and potentially extend the lifespan of the implant significantly.
The sources describe Musk's stated goal as achieving dramatically more recording and stimulation capacity. With a procedure that's safe, he's even publicly compared the eventual procedure to being more like laser eye surgery than brain surgery, which is quite a bold claim.
It is bold, and crucially, it's designed to be wireless. The signals are intended to be transmitted wirelessly, probably via Bluetooth, to a computer that decodes them to control external devices. Musk's analogy, which you probably heard, is that it's like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires that go to your brain.
And the sources point out the significant funding Neuralink has attracted over $150 million, with a big chunk, $100 million, coming directly from Musk himself.
They've done extensive preclinical work in animals, yeah. That viral video of the monkey playing the video game Pong using the implant, that was from Neuralink.
Right. And then came what the sources describe as a really significant step, getting U.S. FDA approval for human clinical trials back in May 2023. This apparently followed a detailed, 3-year back and forth with the FDA, where Neuralink had to address concerns about, well, how the device would be implanted, the risk of those thin wires maybe moving over time, and how the device could be safely removed if needed.
It was definitely a major hurdle cleared. The sources also briefly mention Musk's broader stated motivation, which includes concerns about the potential threat of advanced AI and him seeing DCIs as a way for humanity to kind of keep pace technologically.
It's important to remember, though, and sources are quite clear on this, that while Neuralink is very high profile, many of their claims haven't really been independently verified yet. And there's still relatively limited public information available on the human trials they've actually started. It's apparently not listed in the main NIH clinical trial database, and specific assessment details haven't been shared publicly.
That's true. And critically, this isn't a one-company race by any means. The sources highlight other key competitors who are taking very different approaches.
Like paradromics. The sources describe their focus as being kind of similar to Neuralink's goal, right? Getting vastly more smaller electrodes for higher density recording from neurons.
Right. Similar goal, different method. Their device design looks more like that traditional bed of needles, maybe closer to the Utah array concept in appearance. And they aren't pursuing robotic surgery for implantation, at least not initially. They've also received significant funding, including from DARPA, that's the Pentagon's research agency, and we're aiming to start clinical trials relatively soon.
Then there's Synchron, which took a really fascinatingly different route.
Synchron, yeah, they developed the Stentro device. And the really surprising insight here is how they get it into the brain. Instead of open surgery, it's inserted much less invasively via a vein, usually in the back of the neck. It's guided up into the brain's motor cortex area, where it then sort of splays out like a tiny cage, embedding 16 electrodes into the walls of the blood vessel right next to the neurons it's recording from.
Wow. Okay, via a vein. That dramatically changes the accessibility and the risk profile compared to open brain surgery, surely. Does putting it in a vein affect the signal quality much?
Well, it does record slightly differently, yeah. It captures the aggregate activity of maybe around 1,000 neurons from that location. Synchron argues, and the sources note this, that while it's maybe less nuanced than getting signals directly from individual neurons, that less detailed signal can actually be more stable and more robust over the long term. And it's certainly proven effective enough for control.
And Synchron is actually ahead in human trials, aren't they? The sources mentioned their SWIT-CH study began way back in Australia in 2019, well before Neuralink even got their FDA approval for human trials. That's right. That trial wrapped up in early 2022 and involved 5 patients with severe paralysis. They successfully demonstrated control of an external computer for tasks like, hands-free texting, emailing, banking, shopping, and communicating basic needs just using their thoughts. And crucially, the sources reported no serious adverse events directly related to the device itself in that trial. They've also received DARPA funding, like Paradromics.
We should probably also mention BlackRock Neurotech. The sources note they've been in this field for a very long time, testing implants for around 20 years already, primarily focused on helping people with paralysis control prosthetics and other devices. They're actually among the very first seeking US FDA commercial approval for a BCI system.
Right, they're pioneers. And then there's Precision Neurosciences, which was co-founded by someone who previously worked at Neuralink. They've developed something called the Layer 7 cortical interface. The sources describe it as a flexible electrode array, almost like a piece of thin, flexible Scotch tape, designed to be implanted right on the surface of the brain without penetrating or damaging any tissue. It's already been used, apparently, in 3 brain tumor patients during their existing surgeries to gather some initial data.
So you really see this dynamic space, different companies pushing very different engineering philosophies. But even with all this progress, the sources make it crystal clear that significant technical hurdles absolutely remain.
Oh yeah, definitely. Durability is still a major one. Can these implants, especially the newer ones with the smaller electrodes, really last for years and years without degrading? The sources note that electrodes can dissolve or be corroded by the body over time, and this issue actually gets worse the smaller they are. The long-term lifespan of Neuralink's super-thin polymer probes, for example, is still basically unknown in humans. Cynthia Chestek, who's a researcher in the field, is quoted emphasizing that we need lifetimes measured in years, like the Utah array has demonstrated it can achieve, despite its other issues.
And even if you manage to record from thousands or tens of thousands of neurons, there's still the massive fundamental challenge of actually decoding what all that activity means, right?
Exactly. Takashi Kozai, another researcher, is quoted stating it quite frankly, "We have no idea how the brain works." Cynthia Chestek agrees that we definitely need more fundamental neuroscience understanding. But she also points out, reasonably I think, that simply having data from many more neurons, even if we don't fully understand the underlying brain mechanisms, might significantly improve the machine learning algorithms we currently use to try and decode intent.
So getting a clear, stable signal for years and knowing what that signal actually means, those are still incredibly hard problems. But if these hurdles can be overcome, the potential applications, as discussed in the sources, they range from truly essential medical use all the way to, well, potential human enhancement.
Right now, the most immediate and compelling use case, the one everyone agrees on, is helping people with severe neurological function loss, things like paralysis, ALS, cerebral palsy, locked-in syndrome. The goal there is restoring the ability to control external devices, whether that's a computer cursor, a prosthetic limb, or communication tools.
The sources mention things like brain-controlled typing becoming feasible. Neuralink has stated a goal of reaching 40 words per minute with their system, which is, about average human typing speed. Early BrainGate work apparently achieved 8 words per minute, even without predictive text.
Yeah, and beyond typing, the companies aren't always super specific about future applications, but the ideas discussed in the sources include things like controlling smart home devices with just a thought, potentially even driving a car someday, maybe brain-to-brain communication, or even enhancing memory and cognition, what's often referred to as human enhancement.
What's the general timeline the experts in the sources seem to anticipate for this technology becoming available, like realistically?
Well, for people with severe impairments or disabilities, the experts generally believe this kind of technology could be available within the next 5 to 10 years. That seems plausible. For broader non-medical use, for enhancement or convenience, that time frame is much, much further out, likely 20 years or potentially even more. Lee Hochberg's perspective, mentioned earlier, remains firmly focused on helping those who need it most first.
And Dennis DeGray's quote about wanting one implanted this afternoon if I could, that really drives home that immediate, urgent need for people living with paralysis today.
Absolutely. There's also this interesting idea of a potential tipping point discussed in the sources. Tom Oxley, the CEO of Synchron, he sort of imagines a future where maybe people who are just losing finger dexterity due to normal aging might consider a BCI. If the procedure becomes extremely safe, easy, and the control it offers becomes genuinely superior to using their own aging body.
Military interest is also noted, isn't it? That DARPA funding for companies like Paradromics and Synchron, it clearly points to potential defense applications. Things like silent communication between soldiers on a battlefield, or maybe activating equipment using only thought commands.
It does raise those possibilities. But one expert, Dr. Hannah Maslin, is quoted noting that it's probably highly unlikely most people would opt for elective brain surgery just for recreation or convenience anytime soon. That said, Jonathan Tumum offers a slightly different perspective, viewing BCIs as almost a logical next step, essentially increasing the bandwidth between our brains and the external tools we already rely on, like our smartphones, which already act as extensions of our memory and cognitive function in many ways.
Okay, so this rapid advancement and this incredibly broad potential naturally lead us straight to the big questions. The sources spend significant time exploring the crucial ethical considerations raised by this technology.
They really do dive into the what-ifs. And a key finding from that UK Royal Society report mentioned in the sources is the very strong conclusion that the public absolutely needs to have a clear voice in shaping how this technology is used and regulated moving forward.
Privacy is, of course, a massive concern. Who owns the incredibly intimate data recorded directly from your brain? How could it be used? Who gets access? These are huge questions.
Huge. And while some fears jump straight to, mind reading, one nuance highlighted by Hannah Maslin is that current BCIs, the ones being developed now, they tend to record from very specific brain areas, often related just to movement intention. And they typically require active mental effort from the user to generate a useful signal. So fears about the implant somehow revealing your deepest, undirected thoughts might be a bit overblown in the context of today's technology.
Okay, that's a useful distinction. But other risks are unfortunately quite real and concerning. Brainjacking has discussed the potential for a third party to hack into the BCI system and gain control, modifying its settings or behavior without the user's consent. The sources point out this isn't just theoretical. Real-world examples exist, like hackers accessing pacemakers.
Yeah, that's a scary possibility. And Paradromic CEO Matt Engel raises another fascinating ethical question. Could BCI data eventually be used as evidence in a court of law? Similar to how a diary or computer records might be subpoenaed today.
Wow. And there are also these profound questions about control and agency, aren't there? If the BCI system misinterprets your intention, or maybe it malfunctions and something happens as a result, what level of responsibility do you actually bear for that outcome?
That's a tough one. And then there's the critical societal issue of equity. If this technology eventually confers significant cognitive or physical advantages, how do we make sure access isn't restricted only to the very wealthy? How do we avoid creating a new kind of digital or even biological divide?
Exactly. And finally, safety and transparency during development and clinical trials are just absolutely essential, especially when you're dealing with brain implants and unknown long-term effects. The sources do mention ethical concerns and specific issues that have been raised regarding Neuralink's animal testing practices in the past, and also about the handling and transport of devices removed from monkey brains.
Yeah. Transparency is key there. Now, beyond the implantable path, the sources also explore an alternative approach, non-invasive BCIs, devices you could just wear with no surgery required at all.
That definitely sounds much more appealing to many people, myself included. But what are the big challenges there? Why aren't we all wearing them already?
Well, the primary challenge, as Cynthia Chestek explains it, is basically physics. The skull is just a major barrier. It muffles the tiny electrical signals coming from neurons inside. She says the physics are extremely challenging for non-invasive devices to get a clear, high-resolution reading of individual neuron activity from outside the head.
Okay. But despite that difficulty, companies are certainly trying, right? Facebook, for instance, stated a goal of creating a wearable device that could allow, 100 words per minute typing non-invasively.
They did, and they funded researchers who did achieve real-time decoding of spoken words from brain signals, but that was using surgical surface electrodes, not non-invasive tech. Facebook itself was exploring non-invasive methods like measuring blood oxygenation patterns using near-infrared light, but they seem to have scaled back that project.
And Kernel, the company founded by Brian Johnson, they initially pursued implants but then pivoted entirely to wearables, investing really heavily. Johnson apparently believes they've discovered a new, non-invasive way to pick up meaningful brain signals that others have missed.
Right, they're betting big on non-invasive. However, Anna Wexler brings up a really important potential social barrier, regardless of how good the tech gets. She points out that other wearables, even non-BCI ones like Google Glass way back when, have faced significant public acceptance issues. She questions if people would really trust a company like, say, Meta, Facebook, with a device that interacts so closely with something as personal as their brain activity, even if it doesn't require surgery.
That's a very fair point. So as we look ahead, the picture the sources paint seems to be one of maybe cautious optimism.
I think that's fair. There's undeniable potential for truly transformational change, especially for individuals living with severe disabilities. That comes through so clearly as the powerful immediate benefit highlighted throughout the material.
But it's equally clear that the significant technical hurdles, things like durability and signal decoding and the really complex ethical and societal questions we just touched on, they absolutely remain unresolved for now.
Yeah, and truly understanding both the current capabilities and the potential implications is just vital for ensuring this technology develops in a way that's both beneficial and responsible for everyone.
So to wrap up our deep dive into these sources, we've journeyed from those early, clunky, wired implants that proved basic control was possible, through the really ambitious high-electrode wireless systems being developed by Neuralink and others, explored less invasive and even non-invasive alternatives, and grappled with the incredible medical promise that's set against the really complex ethical and societal questions this whole field provokes.
It's definitely a technology that's pushing the boundaries of what it means to interact with the world around us, and maybe even what it means to be human.
Yeah. As this technology advances, potentially blurring the lines between human thought and machine control in entirely new ways, it really makes you pause and consider. What does it fundamentally mean to be well-informed, or even what it truly means to be human, when external devices might become so intimately integrated with our very minds? What kind of future, informed by what we've learned today, do you want to see built?
It's definitely a question we all need to be thinking about as this moves forward.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.